Welcome to Merchant Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Area Sales Manager Greg Davidson from the St. Louis, Missouri area joins us for an update on managing soft red winter wheat and more. We chat about PowerCore Enlist corn and how weather affects crops in his area. And stay tuned to hear what Greg's favorite soybean variety is, as well as new products he's had experience working with.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Merchant Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben, Lynn, Dylan, and a special guest. I'm going to turn this over to you, Ben.
Yeah, today we have Greg Davidson. He's a regional agronomist, CCA, and sales manager for us. Greg presides east of St. Louis, is where his home and his farm's at, and he kind of covers that western Illinois, western southern Illinois market. And he'll give us a little bit more detail on that. But today he is live in scene. We're looking at wheat, and that's one of the main topics we wanted to cover today. So, Greg, why don't you tell us the territory that you kind of cover, and we'll start talking about some wheat.
So my territory, like Ben said, I'm right here just east of St. Louis. If you look in the background here, you can actually see the arch right there. My territory goes up from Greene County, Illinois, all the way down to Randolph County, straight over to Perry County, and all the way up to Effingham County. So that I-57 corridor, so I cover about half the southern part of the state from east to west.
So there's a lot of different soil types in that territory, isn't there, Greg?
Oh, we go from some really, really good black clay ground to some really, really paper white clay ground, some post oak dirt.
Yep. So what's going on behind you there? We're looking at a field of wheat that's starting to green up. What's everybody thinking? Is nitrogen starting to go on wheat, or what's the current status right now?
Yeah, so right now, like you just said, the wheat's starting to green up down south here. And there's been a lot of guys starting to run nitrogen on their wheat. They're kind of starting to do it some in the evening time to kind of start when that ground firms back up. There's some pockets that have been wet. There's some pockets that are dry. We've had a lot of snowfall this winter, so we've got a good chunk of moisture in the ground right now. So right now, a lot of guys are out walking wheat fields, checking their tiller counts, figuring out if they're going to do a one pass or a two pass on their wheat. There is some guys actually, believe it or not, are pulling some soil tests to kind of see what they're going to do to start feeding that wheat so we can push and get that bumper crop that we definitely need this year.
So what are the tiller counts like in the field that's behind you? Or what are they seeing for average tiller counts? Are we doing good? Are we a little bit further behind? What are guys seeing?
We're probably the pretty average spot. We had some ice damage this winter through the whole territory on wheat. So that's where we're kind of looking and seeing if we need to do a one shot or a two shot to kind of push and try to push and get the most tillers that we can out of this wheat crop.
With you being an agronomist, Greg, what is your favorite program for high yielding wheat? What are guys doing for nitrogen, sulfur, in their one pass, two pass? What kind of herbicides are they using? What's going on?
In the fall, I like to try to get a good starter program started. So I like to try to get all your DAP and potash down in the fall. Either you can no-till your wheat, or you could conventionally sit there and work that little bit of fertilizer in, or let the drill do it. I try to shoot for that 1.5 to 1.7 million. There is some guys that we're slowly starting to back that down, just like we do on soybeans. And the biggest thing is if we can space that wheat out just a little bit and try to capture a couple more tillers, that equals to more heads. As I tell everybody, if you take a square foot and you can get 100 tillers, that square foot, we're shooting for 100 bushel wheat. So after that, we come into the spring. We either depend on depending on how the winter weather conditions were. Are we shooting for one pass? We shooting for two? The biggest thing is I like a two pass better than a one pass, but you got to pick and choose your own battles. On the nitrogen side, your normal is about 120 units total. There's some guys that are still on that 100 and less. There's some guys that are pushing it. I like going up to 130 and pushing that nitrogen a little bit on that two-pass program. But the kicker is you probably need to use a Palisade product and shorten the height of that wheat so we don't have any issues with that wheat falling over or lodging.
When does the Palisade get applied?
Palisade, I like the Palisade around that Feke's 4 to 5 on the Feke scale. I like it a little earlier than later. The biggest thing about it is you got to make sure you hit it at that right time. You could actually hurt your wheat, in my book, than help it if you wait till later to put that Palisade application on. And that's a product out of Syngenta, and there is some generics out there. One other little secret that I will tell everybody, there's a lot of guys using Tilt. I'm not sponsored by any chemical companies or anything, but if you want to push and get some more bushels out of it, think about putting about a half rate of Trivapro on your wheat during your Harmony pass, which Harmony is your herbicide pass that we are probably going to start on here probably in the next 2 weeks.
So nitrogen will go on, and then there'll be another pass of herbicide separate, correct?
Yep, correct.
One of the things that you have taught me is when they incorporate your Harmony pass or your nitrogen pass, it can be extremely yield detriment, correct?
So, and then by the time Feke's 10.5 comes along, we'll come in here with some Miravis Ace and a little bit of insecticide and put that fungicide on that wheat, and hopefully we're off to the big races. So as long as weather cooperates with us.
Do you have a standard like tiller count that you like to use, whether it be per foot a row or whatever number that is, where you start to decide whether the 1 pass versus 2 pass makes more sense?
No, more or less, I just kind of leave it up to, I kind of advise the grower, what I think by that square foot rule that I do. Most of them will go agree with me and go that 2 pass, and there's some of them that they just make that 1 pass and go for it. The biggest thing is how you manage your crop is what you put in it is what you're going to get out of it.
Greg, what row width are most of the farmers down there? Are any of them using 15-inch rows?
There's a couple of them at 15-inch rows, but I would say the majority of them are still 7.5.
So before we wrap the wheat up, I do have a question. One of your dealers stopped by on his way home, and there were some areas where you were at that were having some issues with dry soil and didn't have the wheat off to the greatest start. Have you been down over that direction and checked that out? Did the wheat germinate? Is it looking to be coming along, even though it might have been put in some dry dirt?
So this fall we had a dry fall for seeding, and that dealer that you're speaking of, over there that was severely dry, their count is probably going to be closer to that final count of about 1 million to 1.1 million seeds per acre, or plants per acre that is up. I spoke to him the other night, and I recommended, from what I seen walking the field, that we need to definitely make a 2-pass program and try to get as many tillers we could get up now, so we don't lose yield to the lack of population that's out there.
I think it speaks to the resiliency of wheat in general, and then the high yielding opportunity we have with our wheat, that the stuff can historically have a really bad start and still overcome some detriments and be high yielding. Because he was pretty nervous that it was going to be too mission critical and probably abort and go a different direction. But good to hear that there is some resiliency there, that it's going to come through and be able to take it to yield.
Greg, what varieties are you seeing being used in your territory?
So we do have some of that real hyper early wheat, that Peyton down here, and it's looking phenomenal for that hyper early side. The biggest one that's in my whole territory is our Maddie. That's our number 1 seller. It's very agronomically sound. It's got some horsepower to it. And most of our customers down this way, they love it. They absolutely love it. They're excited to see what's next. That's the biggest thing. They see where we're at now, and they can't wait to make the next step.
So when it comes to the hyper early and ultra early market that you have, how early are those guys pulling the crop off? Are they 7 to 10 days? That's typically what we talk about up here with the comparison between like a Peyton and a Maddie. It's 7 to 10 days ahead, maybe a skosh earlier depending on the environment that they're in. Are they seeing that same thing in your neck of the woods? And put some dates on it on when you'd see a typical harvest of the hypers and ultras?
So we got a good story on this one. So I don't know if Joe remembers this phone call last year, but on May 28th, we had one of our own dealers cutting hyper early wheat, pulling it off in the mid 70s to 80 bushel per acre range. And he's pulling off wheat pretty damn early. I mean, last year we had more of a drier year, I would say, in that May, after we went through the rainfall effect through March and April. But we went through a dry period, and between the moon and everything, turned that wheat. And he made a phone call up to Merchman's and said, hey, he says, it's May 28th and we're cutting wheat. So we're pulling wheat off pretty early with these hyper earlies. And that's something to be excited about, because if you get that wheat off, you can get your double crop beans in, you could capture more bushels on those double crop beans.
How did his double crop beans yield?
Double crop beans were in the mid 40s last year as a whole average throughout my territory.
Yeah, by getting beans stuck in the ground, potentially the first week of June, mid 40s to mid 50s shouldn't be that hard to accomplish, right?
Right. The biggest thing is with our crop, the 70% the weather controls, and that's the only thing we got to work with. And we turned out a little drier at the end than we did wetter, and I think there's a potential in the next couple of years that we could have some double crop beans making what first crop beans make.
Yeah, I remember for most of the listeners up here remembered how Iowa was, and you and I talked on the phone. I think I took a Monday off and was planting beans, and I was planting first crop, and you were telling me that dealer was chasing the combine with his double crop.
Yeah, as soon as the combine was leaving the field, the planter was pulling in, and they were running like crazy.
That is the earliest I've ever heard wheat come off as long as I've been in this business. So it is the hyper earlies and ultra earlies are changing the way farmers look at wheat, particularly that great opportunity for double crop. So that's not going to happen every year. It kind of depends upon how the winter goes and whatnot, but that's a record for us.
And that was straight to the elevator moisture, right? And it wasn't like he was taking it off and running it through.
Moisture straight to the elevator.
I think to build on Joe's point, I think last year we were probably a week to 2 weeks earlier with the green up process, but this is about the same time that we were filming last year, isn't it, Greg? I mean, we're tracking along.
Yeah, it's about the same time as last year. It is a little warmer out here than last year, I can tell you that one.
Yeah, and next week's going to make a big difference too.
Yeah. The biggest thing that for everybody to remember is wheat always matures by the moon. That's the biggest thing to always watch for when we get to that May-June timeline. Once we hit that full moon, it'll be a couple weeks and it'll be going full speed ahead.
Well, so get that farmer's almanac. So, Greg, for a little bit of our viewers' insight, you were one that was, when we started talking about the Merchman corn coming back in the lineup, you had a lot of excitement related to that. So from your standpoint, from an agronomic standpoint and a sales standpoint, what's the countryside look like in your area with Merchman corn?
So on the Merchman corn, I'm pretty excited about this coming season. We got a couple new varieties to work with our growers. Last year we hit a home run with that 111 day, also known as the moneymaker. I got the privilege last year to try out our new 112 day or full racehorse, and I'll put that hybrid up against anybody's. That thing is agronomically sound, throws on some big wide leaves, and it throw on that big flex ear. And if you treat her just right and you take care of her, she'll pay you back in bushels. That's for sure. And that 113 day, that hybrid that we have, it will go anywhere. I've seen nothing but good results out of it. And yeah, we're going to have a pretty stout lineup this year for our customers, and we're pretty excited. It's going to be a big corn year. They're forecasting 92 million acres planted for corn. So it's going to be a big year for Merchant Seeds this year on our corn hybrids.
So what does the hybrid range look like for your area? What do you guys plant?
Well, we plant anywhere from that 111 day to that 118 day on our hybrids. That's our placement look like.
Greg, you were talking about rotation, and your territory, I would say, is one of the little bit more unique territories when it comes to rotation, because the commodity price dictates rotation more than where we would see in central Illinois or here in Iowa. Because you guys, if the price of corn isn't to a certain dollar amount, you guys do a heck of a lot more beans, wheat, and double crop that direction. So what's farmers' sentiment? Is there going to be more corn planted this year than what you guys have seen in the past, or where are guys at with that?
From what we're seeing right now with the prices of the commodities, we're looking at probably a little more corn acres than bean acres. There was a chunk of wheat that was sowed this fall, so we're probably going to be leaning more higher on that corn and double crop bean acres, just because of the way the commodity prices have been. And on the rotation, I would say we're probably going to be just still on that higher corn wheat rotation this year just because of the prices.
So Greg, when we know what our products and how they handle kind of like our tar spot or other diseases, what are you seeing down in your neck of the woods against maybe some other competitors?
So this year we saw a big chunk of rust. We had a hurricane come up and bring in rust up with it. Tar spot, we've finally starting to see some tar spot come through this area. We've seen it up north. Remember last year or the year before, I was the first one to document in Monroe County, Illinois, tar spot. And we're starting to see the pressure now. We're seeing a lot of guys starting to think about double fungicide on their corn acres. There's some studies that locally that we've done where some of it is paid and some of it hasn't. I think the biggest thing is with our hybrids to make sure that you're choosing the right product for right acre for replacement, and to make sure that agronomically that it's sound between southern rust or tar spot. The biggest thing I will tell you is if you pick a hybrid that has a very good tolerance to rust, it could be a little lighter on the tar spot and vice versa. So the biggest thing is let's pick placement for that area. Let's go off of our historic data from the last couple seasons and try to pick a hybrid that we know is going to fit for our territory.
I think it's a good point. When we look at tar spot versus rust, this conversation was had everywhere because of, we had rust clear up here. Typically what we have seen is that tar spot, if you have it, it's an annual event. You're going to have to deal with it, where rust is dependent on those southern winds. So I think it's a great point that if southern rust was a yield limiting factor for you last year, that might not hold true if we don't get those southern prevailing winds, whereas tar spot, from our standpoint, we want to protect against tar spot every year because we know we're going to have it. Whereas if we're going to play defense against southern rust, may or may not have it depending on the weather outcomes there.
So from a bean perspective, Greg, what maturities do you like in your territory, and what are your favorite couple bean numbers and why?
So my territory out of our whole company is probably the most diverse because I sell anything between a 3.1 maturity all the way to a 4.8 maturity. It makes it very enjoyable because you get to see a lot of our products across a lot of acres. My number one favorite product in our whole lineup is our Austins. And it's a 4.0. It's got a little bit better health to it, which kind of extends it out to a 4.3. And that bean, we can go first crop or you can go double crop with it. And one thing about that bean is the seed size makes for the yield. So one little note on that is we definitely got to have that August rain first crop wise, that we got to have that water to get that potash up to build that seed size on that plant. So we can build up that yield.
Austins are notorious for a 2-bean pod, and that's where, to Greg's point, what we get out of that, I guess the science behind it is that we are subjected to probably a similar node count as most beans, but there is a propensity to throw a 2-bean pod, but it'll make up for that in weight. And ultimately, we sell in weight, so that's why guys are very excited about it. It does the same thing, up here to the north, and you're exactly right. It is that top end level to that. You catch an August rain and it really throws that big seed size out there. It'll ring the bell from Iowa clear down into Tennessee.
So what are your thoughts on our 24 series, last year's launch of the Denvers? I think those two make a very nice combination when planted together. What are your thoughts on that, Greg?
Yeah, I think the Denvers, the new Denvers that we released for this past year is going to be a very good complement to that Austin. Don't know if it's going to be the full replacement. I don't think quite that yet. But those Denvers, one thing I will say is they're an attractive looking bean. They are a light tawny bean, and they come out of the ground real fast. They are stacked with STS, which means sulfonylurea tolerant soybeans. We could use some different chemistries with that. But with that bean, a little different from Austin. It's got more of an average seed size. But the fit on that bean, we're trying to place it on some more productive acres and tougher acres. Where the Austins, we can go on the tougher or better, either or. The biggest thing with that Denver, I'd say, to watch out on is probably just its placement.
What is are a lot more growers starting to use sulfonylurea herbicides in their wheat? Are you starting to see issues? That kind of ties back to our first conversation. Are you starting to see issues with Harmony cleaning things up the way you need them cleaned up in the wheat fields, or what's the trend that direction?
So yeah, there's a lot of guys down south and over east that still use a lot of finesse. And finesse is a product that we put down in the fall for wheat. And that takes care of a lot of the downy brome, a lot of the chickweed, or not chickweed, the chet. And it takes care of those, but the Harmony takes more of care of the broadleafs.
What has you excited from both a Mershman standpoint and Farmer Greg for this coming year?
I would say the biggest thing that has me excited this year, that there's a lot of talk. There's been a lot of studies done on the early planting side, and it's taken me a little bit of time to get comfortable with that, especially with replant wise. And I think we're probably going to see, if this weather shapes up, possibly, we could see some early mid-April planting.
That's exciting. We've seen some on our own farm. We've seen some big advantages with getting the beans stuck in the ground early. So hopefully you get to experience that, Greg.
And I would say there's a chunk of guys that is either going to run the bean planter first over the corn planter, or just going to both take off at the same time.
Yeah, the key is with the early planting is you got to watch that forecast for that possible dangerous frost, killing frost, and we every year we see it. We see it somewhere.
Yep.
And so that's why you gotta have a good long range forecaster if you're gonna push the needle to early.
Couldn't agree more.
Correct.
So Greg, we're gonna make you stick through. We got the professional back. For 2 weeks we had to have Dylan and Lynn cover our corny jokes to get us pulled out of here, but we're gonna make you stick around, and we'll have Joe get us out of here.
The B team has been fired.
You guys did a fine job.
Not good.
It wasn't much of a standard set by me, but anyhow. Well, I always try to do things timely, when it comes to my jokes, and right now next week's going to feel like spring, so I thought, well, we need to talk a little bit about spring, and also this weekend there's going to be a time change, daylight savings time. So here we go. If spring is all about cleaning, spring cleaning, what season is dedicated to making a mess. Something I've been thinking about, okay? When you do spring cleaning, you never know what you have until you clean out your closet. Okay, just things that are like keep me up at night, Okay, all right. Now let's go back to this daylight savings time. Okay, yes, it's daylight savings time. The clock in my car will finally be correct.
Yep.
Okay, just a reminder for everyone that Monday will be happening 1 hour earlier this week. Okay,
Great.
all right. And this one here, you can tell your kids. Okay, why did the clock get in trouble? It was always talking too much. It was always talking, tick-tock, tick-tocking. Okay. If you got to explain them, they're not very good. What kind of clock is the hardest to change for daylight savings time? A sundial. Sundial.
I heard that one.
Okay. Well, that's all I'm going to put you through for this week. I'll get back to work for next week. But anyhow, Greg, thanks for coming and joining our podcast and video today. Greg is one of our best agronomists, and he does get out in the field and knows his products. So I'll give you a big thank you for that, because you are hands-on, and that's important if you're making seed recommendations. So your dealers are very fortunate to have you. And as always, we hope your family is safe and everybody's healthy, and we'll see you next week.